distillation, water is added to adjust the alcohol content. This step makes sure the whiskey reaches the desired alcohol by volume. US regulations allow whiskey to include up to 2.5% added flavors, though straight whiskey contains none. Some producers add spices, botanicals, or color during distillation or aging to give their product a unique touch. Aging is crucial. Whiskey sits in wooden barrels for years, developing its flavor and color. In the US, whiskey must age for at least 2 years, but many are aged for 10 to 12 years for a richer and more complex taste. Now that we know everything we need and the basics, it's time to see how it's actually made. Every whiskey starts with grain, either malted or unmalted. Truckloads of grain arrive straight from farms and are stoned in silos. But before they're used, the grain is carefully inspected and cleaned to remove dust and any unwanted particles. For malt whiskey, barley is the star ingredient. It goes through a process called malting, where the grains are moistened and allowed to partially germinate. During germination, enzymes are released to turn starches into sugars. The process is halted by drying the barley with heat. This method is commonly used in Scotch whiskey. Other whiskeys, like Irish single pot still or bourbon, use unmalted grains instead. The next step is mashing. This is where grains are mixed with water to create a base for fermentation. Whiskey makers take the chosen grains, like malted wheat, flaked maize, or rye, and they combine it with hot water and stir the mix to make sure everything blends. During this stage, starches in the grains are broken down into sugars. Ground grains are placed in a large tank known as a mash tun, where they are mixed with hot water. Even when unmalted grains are used, a bit of malted barley is added to help with starch-to-sugar conversion. The result is a thick porridge-like mixture called mash. Once the sugar has been extracted, the mash is ready for fermentation. Once the mash is ready, it's time to ferment it. The mixture is placed into large vats, often called washbacks, and left to ferment for 1 to 2 weeks. During fermentation, yeast is added to the mash or wort. The yeast feeds on the sugars, converting them into alcohol. This process usually takes between 48 and 96 hours, depending on the yeast strain and fermentation time. The result is a beer-like liquid called distiller's beer or wash, which has an alcohol content of around 7 to 10%. After fermentation, the solids are separated and discarded. The liquid alcohol, or ethanol, moves on to the next stage of whiskey making. Distillation is where whiskey starts to take shape. It purifies the alcohol by heating the liquid until it vaporizes and then cooling it back into a liquid. This process basically increases the alcohol content and removes impurities. Most distillation happens in copper stills, which also help eliminate unwanted flavors, but this step